The earliest sculptors of this period thought things out for themselves, and again produced works that were full of interest, so that in 3 or 4 generations they reached a perfection hardly, if at all, inferior to that of several hundred years earlier. On this the same evils recurred. Sculptors obtained high prices. The art became a trade. Schools arose which professed to sell the holy spirit of art for money. Pupils flocked from far and near to buy it, in the hopes of selling it later on, and were struck purblind as a punishment for the sin of those who sent them. Before long, a second iconoclastic fury would infallibly have followed, but for the prescience of a statesman who succeeded in passing an act to the effect that no statue of any public man or woman should be allowed to remain unbroken for more than 50 years, unless at the end of that time a jury of 24 men, taken at random from the street, pronounced in favor of its being allowed a second 50 years of life. Every 50 years this reconsideration was to be repeated, and unless there was a majority of 18 in favor of the retention of the statue, it was to be destroyed. Perhaps a simpler plan would have been to forbid the erection of a statue to any public man or woman till he or she had been dead at least 100 years, and even then to insist on reconsideration of the claims of the deceased and the merit of the statue every 50 years. But the working of the act brought about results that on the whole were satisfactory. For in the first place, many public statues that would have been voted under the old system were not ordered when it was known that they would be almost certainly broken up after 50 years, and in the second, public sculptors, knowing the work to be so ephemeral, scamped it to an extent that made it offensive even to the most uncultured eye. Hence, before long, subscribers took to paying the sculptor for the statue of the dead statesman on condition that he did not make it. The tribute of respect was thus paid to the deceased, the public sculptors were not mulcted, and the rest of the public suffered no inconvenience. I was told, however, that an abuse of this custom is growing up, inasmuch as the competition for the commission not to make a statue is so keen that sculptors have been known to return a considerable part of the purchase money to the subscribers by an arrangement made with them beforehand. Such transactions, however, are always clandestine. A small inscription is let into the pavement where the public statue would have stood, which informs the reader that such a statue has been ordered for the person, whoever he or she may be, but that as yet the sculptor has not been able to complete it. There has been no act to repress statues that are intended for private consumption, but, as I have said, the custom is falling into desuetude. Returning to Erewhonian customs in connection with death, there is one which I can hardly pass over. When anyone dies, the friends of the family write no letters of condolence, neither do they attend the scattering, nor wear mourning, but they send little boxes filled with artificial tears, and with the name of the sender painted neatly upon the outside of the lid. The tears vary in number from 2 to 15 or 16, according to degree of intimacy or relationship, and people sometimes find it a nice point of etiquette to know the exact number which they ought to send. Strange as it may appear, this attention is highly valued, and its omission by those from whom it might be expected is keenly felt. These tears were formerly stuck with adhesive plaster to the cheeks of the bereaved, and were worn in public for a few months after the death of a relative. They were then banished to the hat or bonnet, and are now no longer worn. The birth of a child is looked upon as a painful subject, on which it is kinder not to touch. The illness of the mother is carefully concealed until the necessity for signing the birth formula, of which hereafter, renders further secrecy impossible, and for some months before the event the family live in retirement, seeing very little company. When the offence is over and done with, it is condoned by the common want of logic, for this merciful provision of nature, this buffer against collisions, this friction which upsets our calculations, but without which existence would be intolerable, this crowning glory of human invention, whereby we can be blind and see at one and the same moment, this blessed inconsistency exists here as elsewhere. And though the strictest writers on morality have maintained that it is wicked for a woman to have children at all, inasmuch as it is wrong to be out of health that good may come, yet the necessity of the case has caused a general feeling in favour of passing over such events in silence, and of assuming their non-existence except in such flagrant cases as force themselves on the public notice. Against these the condemnation of society is inexorable, and if it is believed that the illness has been dangerous and protracted, it is almost impossible for a woman to recover her former position in society. The above conventions struck me as arbitrary and cruel, but they put a stop to many fancied ailments, for the situation, so far from being considered interesting, is looked upon as savouring more or less distinctly of a very reprehensible condition of things, and the ladies take care to conceal it as long as they can, even from their own husbands, in anticipation of a severe scolding as soon as the misdemeanour is discovered. Also, the baby is kept out of sight, except on the day of signing the birth formula, until it can walk and talk. Should the child unhappily die, a coroner's inquest is inevitable, but in order to avoid disgracing a family which may have been hitherto respected, it is almost invariably found that the child was over 75 years old and died from the decay of nature. End of chapter 13. Recording by Ernst Patinama, Amsterdam, the Netherlands.